Let's feature now the aforementioned Garland Nixon, always our go-to man in Washington. I don't know if he can solve the shortage of eggs dilemma that was just brought up, but I know he's got trenchant points of view on that pretty little silver Corvette. Garland, welcome. Anything on the eggs for a start? We just had an interesting call by Dr. Doom in San Diego, who describes the ridiculous cost of eggs in the U.S.
Well, what's interesting about, whether it's eggs or baby formula here in the United States is how quickly these things arise. I mean, if it's a fuel or fertilizer or whatever the case may be, and I don't know how fertilizer affects eggs, but whatever the case, you would think that there would be a slow an increase in the price of eggs rather than it happening overnight. And I suspect that the egg crisis will maybe last for a while and go away. Sometimes these particular stories come up at the same time that say Donald Trump's taxes. That story flopped. The Biden document comes out, and sometimes they give us an additional something to talk about, so that maybe we don't focus as much on some of the things that would be of much greater consequence. Not that I'm not an egg aficionado. I love eggs and baked goods with eggs, but I just think maybe we have bigger fish to fry right now.
Yes, well, a very interesting foodie metaphor, that one. Now, Garland, I like a Corvette. I loved the Corvette that the Biden crime family have got in their garage. But it's a truly hair-raising story, isn't it? That Hunter Biden is paying his own father $50,000 a month in rent. What kind of father-son relationship is that? And what kind of a house can command $50,000 a month in rent in Delaware?
Well, that's kind of like the Zelensky crypto scam. It's where you have to figure out how to move money around and you need an excuse. Let's just throw a number out there. Let's say $50,000 was 10% of some money that they had taken in that needed to go to the big guy. Well, you couldn't just hand him his 10%. So you say, well, I got an idea. I'll claim that I'm paying you $50,000 a month rent. That will constitute your 10%, and then we will all be even. So I would suspect that when money crosses hands, especially in those amounts between Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, particularly going up to the big guy, that maybe there's a bit more to that than just rent being paid on a property.
Yeah, me too. You and me both. We've obviously got the same kind of minds. What's going to happen about all these secret documents? A lot of people are writing into the show saying nothing will happen. Joe Biden will get away with it scot-free. Do you believe that?
Absolutely. I think that, when you look at what happened with Donald Trump and the documents, they made a big deal out of it, probably knowing, my position on the Trump documents all along was you would never get 12 jurors to say, yes, I think that's that's a crime that we have to convict Donald Trump for. I think they recognize that. And now this is happening with Joe Biden. They're going to whitewash both of them. They're going to stick them together kind of and whitewash them in the media. And additionally, you have to wonder how tenuous Joe Biden's hold is on power, if he has any power at all, in the White House in light of what's going on in Ukraine. Yesterday we saw the first major anti-NATO, anti-Ukraine war march in New York City, which was, there were a lot of people there. We've got some big ones coming up here in Washington, D.C. and around soon. So you have to think that, being just days away from January 20th, 2 years from which Joe Biden was sworn in, that there are those around him maybe looking for ways to vacate his position far earlier than 2024. And maybe this is, leverage that they can use to convince him that a resting home somewhere would be far better and more comfortable than the RoseGarden.
Well, our mutual friend Max Blumenthal was making the point earlier in the show that the Democrats, some of them, are spooked by the apparent determination of Joe Biden to run again in 2024 and thus potentially still be the president, approaching 90 years old and not even a sprightly 90 years old. But another part of the Democrats are spooked by the idea of President Kamala Harris, and they lack any alternative. It's Biden or it's Harris. Which do you think will win out of those factions?
Well, for starters, regarding the ultimate outcome, I don't think it could matter because I don't see how either of them at this point could win. Joe Biden certainly couldn't do very well in a debate right now, and his record speaks for itself, shall we say. Kamala Harris talks to everyone like she's talking to an elementary school class. Boys and girls, the big countries attack the little countries, and we don't. She talks in such an infantile manner that it's pretty much horrifying to the average voter, so I don't think she can win. The problem the Democrats have is this, and people say they have nobody that could win. Well, they have a few people maybe floating around that could be at least attractive and could, speak well for themselves in a public setting. But anyone who would push back against the policies that the American people are unhappy with would not be allowed to run. So the only thing they can run is some iteration of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, someone who's, like Joe or Nancy Pelosi, who seem to be somewhat out of it, or Kamala Harris, who is just going to, voice what as best she can, what she's told to say. The Democratic Party has painted themselves into a corner, completely and totally allied with the national security state and corporations. So they kind of put themselves in a hopeless position.
Could Hillary make a comeback? Could the Obamas make a comeback?
Well, in theory, a lot of people think that Michelle Obama may run. I just don't think she's a political kind of person. And the reality is they don't really know her ideology. And I'm going to say this. If you're a black person in America, this is going to cross your mind. If you're black people in America, I'm going to tell you right now, this is going to cross your mind. She is a black person of black former slave heritage. And from the perspective of most black people, Barack Obama is of mixed race. Kamala Harris is of mixed race. The idea that a black person who is of a black slave heritage would be allowed to be the president of the United States. I'm just being honest with you. I don't know if it's true or false, but most black people would say no, she would not ever be allowed. A member of the quote, peasant class, if you look at it through the lens of the ruling class in America, she wouldn't be allowed to be president. I don't see that happening.
Now, finally, Garland, and I'm grateful for you joining us. Where lies the security apparatus now that they have been exposed so thoroughly in the Twitter files? It's true that these files are not on mainstream television and they're not on the front pages of mainstream newspapers, but the entire political class has now read them. The entire journalistic class has now read them. And the exposure of the FBI and the CIA has been phenomenal. I mean, whatever it says about the former owners of Twitter, it says even more about the FBI and the CIA. How can anyone entrust them with the power of life and death and law and order when they are exposed as such renegade operators? They're effectively rogue outfits.
Yes, they've been exposed, particularly the FBI, if we look at, going after the Communist Party, calling people, everyone that they didn't like a communist in the 50s and 60s, going after any of the anti-war people in the 70s, the Black liberation and in the 60s and 70s. What we found out is nothing's changed, that they're the same. But there's another group that's been exposed, and that is the so-called oversight groups in Congress. This is clear. But what we've seen is is not only does Congress not involve themselves in the oversight that they are accountable for constitutionally, but that they have been part of it, part and party of these actions with intent. That Adam Schiff and others were sending names to the FBI. They were doing end arounds to the Constitution. So how can congressional oversight exist if Congress is part of the problem? Where is, and as an organization I'll bring up again that I was a part of, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. When I left, here's the numbers. When I left the ACLU as a member of the board, they were bringing in $300 million a year. They had $950 million in their basically savings accounts. You got all that money. You've got all that power. This is absolutely what the American Civil Liberties Union is supposed to be all over. Where's the ACLU? Where's congressional oversight? What we're seeing now is the organizations and the parts of Congress that are supposed to address this are quiet as a church mouse. And you have to ask yourself why.
Lastly, I said lastly, but this is really lastly. This Kevin McCarthy finally made it as the new Nancy Pelosi. I thought for a minute Juan Guaido was going to pop up in the chair. They were having so many difficulties in agreeing to McCarthy. But tell us, in a nutshell, what can we look forward to with Kevin?
Oh, here's a guy walking around with his Ukraine flag on. He is simply part of the machine. They did the equivalent of the Minsk Accords with the MAGA people. They gave them an agreement that they never intend to keep. They're saying they're going to do certain things. They do not intend to keep any of the promises or any of the agreements that they made with the handful of Republicans who pushed back. So he's part of the problem, part of the machine. And again, I'm a lefty, a far lefty, so I certainly don't agree with the Republicans ideologically, but I do think that the Republican Party is healthier than the Democratic Party because at least they have a contingent that stands up for something, but they're going to get nothing. They got the Minsk Accords. That's what they get. For 3 or 4 years from now, Angela Merkel will be speaking for Kevin McCarthy saying we never intended to cut any money out of the budget.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Pithy and brilliant. Thank you very much, Garland Nixon, as always, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.